The stars in this region of space were old and tired. They burned with a dim orange light that made everything feel ancient and forgotten. This was the edge of known space, where the Valori Collective had never bothered to send their ships. There was nothing here worth finding, or so they had always believed. High Analyst Ketharan stood at the observation deck of his science vessel, the Infinite Inquiry. His compound eyes reflected the distant stars as he studied the darkness ahead. Behind him, the soft clicks and chirps of his crew filled the bridge with familiar sounds. The Valori were an insectoid species, tall and thin, with hard shells that gleamed like polished metal. They had traveled the stars for over 40,000 years. They had seen many things. They had catalogued thousands of species. They believed they understood the galaxy. They were wrong. High Analyst called Yilith, his senior researcher. She approached with the careful movements of someone carrying important news. Our long-range sensors have detected something unusual. Ketharan turned his triangular head toward her. Define unusual. A vessel, drifting without power approximately 2 light minutes from our current position. Yilith paused, and her antennae twitched with uncertainty. It does not match any design in our databases. This caught Ketharan's attention. The Valori databases contained information on every spacefaring species in the known galaxy. Every ship design, every weapon system, every piece of technology had been recorded and analyzed over thousands of years. For something to not match any known design was almost impossible. "Show me," he commanded. The main display flickered to life, and Ketharan felt his heart's beat faster. The vessel on the screen was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was angular and sharp, with harsh lines and flat surfaces. There was no elegance to its design, no flowing curves or artistic touches. It looked like it had been built by someone who cared nothing for beauty and everything for function. The ship was large, perhaps 300 meters in length. Its hull was covered in thick plating that looked almost primitive. Strange tubes and structures protruded from its surface at odd angles. Scorch marks and impact craters covered much of its exterior, telling the story of a violent encounter. "What happened to it?" Ketharan asked quietly. "Unknown. There are signs of weapons damage across the entire hull. Whatever attacked this vessel was thorough." Yilith manipulated the display, zooming in on specific areas. "But High Analyst, look at this. Despite the damage, the structural integrity appears largely intact. This ship survived whatever battle it was in." Ketharan studied the image more closely. He could see where entire sections of the outer hull had been torn away, revealing layers of material beneath. Yet the ship had not broken apart. It had held together through punishment that would have destroyed most vessels he knew of. "Can you identify any markings? Any indication of origin?" Yilith nodded and enhanced the image further. On the side of the vessel, partially obscured by battle damage, were symbols in an unfamiliar script. Beneath them, in a different style, were words that the translator could process. "USS Perseverance." Yilith read aloud. "Earth, Naval Command." The bridge fell silent. Every Valori present knew that name. Earth, a small planet in a distant arm of the galaxy, home to a species that had only recently discovered faster-than-light travel. The humans, they called themselves. The collective had received reports about them over the past 50 years, but they had never been considered important enough for direct contact. The reports described them as primitive but ambitious. They had spread quickly once they left their homeworld, establishing colonies on nearby planets and moons. They were social creatures, emotional and unpredictable. The collective had classified them as a minor species, worthy of observation but not interaction. Now one of their ships drifted dead in space at the edge of the galaxy, and Ketharan felt a strange chill run through his shell. "Has anyone else detected this vessel?" he asked. "Negative. We appear to be the only collective ship in this sector." Ketharan made his decision quickly. "Bring us alongside. We will conduct a full analysis. This is an opportunity to learn more about these humans without the complications of direct contact." The Infinite Inquiry moved through the darkness toward the derelict ship. As they drew closer, Ketharan could see more details of the strange vessel. It was even more brutal up close. The hull plating was thick, far thicker than necessary by Valori standards. Weapon systems protruded from multiple points along its surface, their barrels dark and cold but still menacing. "High Analyst," said one of the sensor technicians, "I am detecting no life signs aboard the vessel. However, there is residual power in some of the internal systems. The ship is not completely dead. Interesting. Prepare a boarding team. I will lead the investigation personally. Yelith's antennae flattened against her head in concern. Is that wise? We know nothing about this species, or their technology, which is exactly why I must see it for myself. Ketheron was already moving toward the equipment lockers. Select your best researchers. We may only have one chance to study this vessel before others learn of its existence. The boarding party consisted of 12 Violori, each wearing environmental suits designed for hostile atmospheres. They crossed the gap between ships in a small shuttle, landing on the hull of the human vessel near what appeared to be an airlock. Ketheran was the first to set foot on the alien metal. It felt different beneath his feet, heavier somehow. The alloy was unfamiliar, and his suit's sensors struggled to identify its exact composition. Multiple metal layers, Yelith reported, scanning the hull beneath them. Iron, carbon, tungsten, and several other elements in unusual combinations. This is not a single material. They have layered different metals together. For what purpose? I cannot say yet. Perhaps structural integrity? Or? She paused, running more scans. Hi, Analyst. I believe this is armor. Multiple layers of different armor types, each designed to stop different kinds of attacks. Ketheran considered this. Violori ships used energy shields for protection, invisible barriers that deflected incoming fire. Physical armor was considered outdated, a relic of ancient times before shield technology had been perfected. Yet here was a ship covered in layers of physical protection. Primitive, one of the other researchers commented. They must not have developed proper shielding technology. Perhaps, Ketheran replied, but he was not so sure. Something about the design felt intentional, not simply primitive. They found the airlock and managed to interface with its controls. The human systems were surprisingly compatible with Violori technology, using similar principles of mechanical and electrical engineering. The outer door ground open slowly, revealing a small chamber beyond. Atmosphere inside is breathable, Yelith reported. Nitrogen and oxygen mix, similar to their homeworld. Gravity generation is offline, but there is residual magnetic field suggesting they used rotation or artificial gravity systems. They moved inside, and the outer door sealed behind them. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting everything in a dim red glow. The inner door opened, and they stepped into the human ship. Ketheran's first impression was one of tightness. The corridors were narrow, built for creatures smaller than Violori. The ceilings were low, and the walls were lined with pipes, cables, and equipment. Everything was functional and exposed. There were no decorative elements, no artistic touches, just metal and machinery. They moved through the corridors slowly, documenting everything they saw. The damage from outside was visible here too. Some sections had been sealed off with heavy metal doors, and Ketheran could see scorch marks on the walls where fires had burned. They sealed off damaged sections, Yelith observed. Compartmentalization. If one section was breached, they could isolate it and continue operating. A logical approach, Ketheran agreed. But again, he noticed how extensive the preparations were. The doors were thick and heavy, designed to withstand tremendous force. The seals looked like they could hold against vacuum for extended periods. They found what appeared to be a crew quarters area. The rooms were small, barely large enough for a single occupant. Each contained a sleeping platform, a storage unit, and a small desk with a computer terminal. Personal items were scattered around, left behind by the missing crew. Ketheran picked up a small frame from one of the desks. Inside was an image, a photograph of several humans standing together. They were strange-looking creatures, soft and fleshy, with only 2 eyes and no protective shells. They seemed fragile, vulnerable, yet they had built this ship. They had traveled across the galaxy in it, and they had survived a battle that had left their vessel scarred but intact. Where are the bodies? One of the researchers asked. If the ship was attacked, where is the crew? It was a good question. They had found no remains, no indication of what had happened to the humans who had served aboard this vessel. The ship felt abandoned rather than destroyed, as if the crew had simply left. They continued deeper into the vessel, moving toward what the internal signs indicated was the bridge. The doors here were even heavier than elsewhere, reinforced with additional plating. It took several minutes to override the security systems and gain access. The bridge was circular, with multiple stations arranged around a central command chair. Displays lined the walls, all dark now except for a few emergency indicators. The command chair was empty, but Ketharan could see personal items nearby. A jacket hung over the back. A cup sat on a small table beside it. They left in a hurry, Yeleth said. But there are no signs of panic, no struggle. They simply departed. Ketharan moved to the main computer terminal and began attempting to access the ship's records. The system was partially functional, running on backup power. After several minutes of work, he managed to retrieve some basic information. This vessel was part of something called the Third Exploration Fleet, he reported. It was assigned to survey this region of space. There are references to a battle, but the details are encrypted. Can you break the encryption? Given time, perhaps. But look at this. Ketharan highlighted a section of the data. The ship's log indicates that after the battle, the crew evacuated to another vessel. They abandoned the Perseverance because it was too damaged to continue, but they survived. They escaped. The researchers exchanged glances. For a primitive species to survive a battle severe enough to leave their ship in this condition was impressive. For them to then evacuate successfully suggested a level of organization and discipline that was unexpected. "Hi, analyst," called one of the researchers from across the bridge. "I have found something you need to see." Ketharan crossed to where the researcher stood. He was looking at a display that showed the ship's technical specifications. What Ketharan saw there made his blood run cold. The Perseverance was not a battleship. It was not a military flagship or a superweapon. According to these specifications, it was classified as a light cruiser, a patrol vessel. It was one of the smallest combat-capable ships in the human fleet. If this battered, heavily armed, impossibly durable vessel was their idea of a small ship, what did their large ships look like? "We need to analyze everything," Ketharan said quietly. "Every system, every weapon, every piece of technology. I want to understand exactly what these humans are capable of." "Is that really necessary?" Yeleth asked. "They are just a primitive species. Surely they pose no real threat to the collective." Ketharan looked around the bridge, at the heavy armor, the reinforced doors, the multiple redundant systems. He thought about the layers of protection on the hull, the weapons he had glimpsed along the ship's exterior. He remembered the image of the soft, fragile-looking humans in the photograph. "I am not sure what they are," he admitted, "but I intend to find out. Begin the full analysis immediately. I want preliminary reports within 6 hours." As his team spread out through the ship, Ketharan remained on the bridge, staring at the empty command chair. He had spent his entire career studying alien species, trying to understand their technology and their psychology. He had thought he had seen everything the galaxy had to offer, but something about this ship disturbed him in ways he could not explain. It was not just the primitive technology or the brutal design. It was something deeper, something he could sense but not identify. This ship had been built by people who expected to fight, expected to be hurt, expected to suffer damage and keep going. Every aspect of its design spoke of a species that understood violence on a fundamental level, that had built their entire approach to space travel around the assumption that they would face enemies. The Vailori had not fought a major war in over 3,000 years. Their conflicts were brief and precise, settled with minimal casualties and quick negotiations. They had forgotten what it meant to face an enemy who would not stop, who would not surrender, who would keep fighting until one side was completely destroyed. As Ketharan stood in the silence of the abandoned bridge, he began to suspect that the humans had not forgotten. He suspected they had never known anything else. And that thought, more than anything else, filled him with a deep and growing fear. The analysis would take days, perhaps weeks. They would study every system, every weapon, every piece of human technology they could find. And Ketharan knew, with a certainty that surprised him, that what they discovered would change everything the collective believed about their place in the galaxy. The humans were coming. They were already out here, exploring, expanding, building their brutal ships and their terrible weapons, and the galaxy had no idea what was approaching. But Ketharan was beginning to understand, and understanding, he realized, was the first step toward fear. He turned away from the command chair and began his work. There was much to learn, and he suspected that every discovery would only deepen the cold dread that had taken root in his hearts. The stars outside continued to burn with their tired orange light, indifferent to the small drama unfolding in the darkness. But somewhere out there, on a small blue world orbiting an ordinary yellow sun, a species was looking up at those same stars with hungry eyes, and they were building more ships. 3 days had passed since the boarding team first set foot on the human vessel. In that time, Ketharan had slept for only a handful of hours. The mysteries of the Perseverance consumed his every thought, driving him to work long past the point of exhaustion. The Infinite Inquiry remained anchored alongside the derelict ship, its own systems working constantly to analyze the data streaming from the research teams. Every deck of the human vessel had been explored, every system had been catalogued, and with each new discovery, Ketharan's unease grew deeper. He stood now in the main analysis chamber of his own ship, surrounded by holographic displays and technical readouts. Yilith stood beside him, her compound eyes flickering between screens as she processed the incoming information. "Let us begin with the hull," Ketharan said, gesturing to bring up the relevant data. "Tell me what we have learned." Yilith touched a control, and a detailed cross-section of the human ship's outer shell appeared before them. It was far more complex than Ketharan had initially realized. Layer upon layer of different materials were stacked on top of each other, each one serving a specific purpose. "The outermost layer is what the humans call ablative armor," Yilith began. "It is designed to absorb energy weapons fire by burning away. As the material vaporizes, it carries heat away from the ship. The layer is thick enough to withstand multiple direct hits before being depleted." Ketharan studied the material specifications. It was crude by Valori standards, simple compounds that any first-year student could have created, but there was a brutal effectiveness to the design that he could not deny. "Beneath the ablative layer," Yilith continued, "we find what they call reactive armor. This layer contains small explosive charges embedded within the plating. When a projectile impacts the surface, these charges detonate outward, disrupting the incoming object before it can penetrate deeper." "They put explosives in their own armor?" one of the junior researchers asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "Yes. The human approach seems to be that controlled damage to their own ship is preferable to uncontrolled damage from enemy weapons." Yilith highlighted the next layer. "Below the reactive armor is a structural matrix made of interlocking hexagonal cells. This honeycomb pattern distributes kinetic force across a wide area, preventing any single impact from causing catastrophic failure." Ketharan leaned closer to the display. The engineering was elegant in its simplicity. Each layer addressed a different type of threat, and together they formed a defensive system that was remarkably comprehensive. "There is more," Yilith said. "Beneath the honeycomb structure, we find radiation-hardened compartments. The walls between sections contain materials specifically designed to block harmful radiation. This suggests the humans expect to operate in environments with high radiation levels, such as near-nuclear detonations," Ketharan murmured. "Precisely. And finally, the innermost layer is a self-sealing membrane. When the hull is breached, this material expands rapidly to fill the gap, maintaining atmospheric integrity until proper repairs can be made." The display showed the complete cross-section, all 5 layers working together to protect the ship and its crew. Ketharan counted the total thickness of the armor. It was massive, accounting for a significant portion of the ship's total mass. "This is inefficient," the junior researcher said. "The mass dedicated to armor could have been used for more weapons or faster engines. A Valori ship of similar size would be twice as fast and carry 3 times the firepower, and would be destroyed by a single well-placed shot." Ketharan replied quietly. The chamber fell silent. Everyone present understood what he was implying. Valori ships relied on energy shields for protection, invisible barriers that could deflect most attacks. But shields could fail. They could be overwhelmed or disrupted by specialized weapons. When a Valori shield failed, the ship behind it was essentially unprotected. The human ship had no shields that they could detect. Instead, it had layer after layer of physical protection, each one capable of absorbing damage that would cripple a Valori vessel. The Perseverance could lose its outer armor completely and still have 4 more layers of defense. "I have calculated the amount of damage this ship could absorb before losing structural integrity," Yelith said. She brought up a new display showing the results. Based on our standard weapon systems, a Valori battlecruiser would need to score direct hits on the same location 17 times to breach all 5 layers of armor. 17 hits in the exact same spot. That is nearly impossible in actual combat conditions. Ketharan said. Correct. Random fire would need to strike the ship hundreds of times to have any chance of causing critical damage. And during all that time, the human vessel would be returning fire with its own weapons. Ketharan walked slowly around the holographic display, studying the armor from different angles. He had been a scientist for over 200 years. He had analyzed technology from dozens of species. He had never seen anything quite like this. Why would anyone build a ship this way? He asked, more to himself than to anyone else. Perhaps they face enemies with very powerful weapons, Yelith suggested. Enemies that can penetrate conventional defenses easily, perhaps. But there is another possibility. Ketharan stopped walking and faced his team. Perhaps they built this ship expecting to fight enemies as dangerous as themselves. The implication hung in the air. If the humans had designed their ships to survive combat against opponents with similar technology, it meant they expected battles to be brutal and prolonged. It meant they expected to take damage, serious damage, and keep fighting anyway. The Valori approach to warfare was based on precision. Strike fast, strike accurately, end the battle quickly. Their ships were built for speed and firepower, not endurance. A typical Valori engagement lasted minutes at most. Looking at the human ship, Ketharan began to understand that humans fought very differently. Their battles were not quick surgical strikes. They were grinding contests of attrition, where both sides absorbed tremendous punishment until one could no longer continue. Show me the damage patterns from the battle this ship survived, he ordered. Yelith brought up a new display, a map of the Perseverance showing every impact point and area of damage. The image was sobering. The ship had been hit hundreds of times. Entire sections of outer armor had been stripped away. Multiple compartments had been breached. Fire damage was visible throughout the port side. Based on the damage patterns, we estimate the engagement lasted approximately 4 hours, Yelith reported. During that time, the Perseverance absorbed over 300 direct hits from what appear to be high-energy plasma weapons and kinetic projectiles. 4 hours, Ketharan repeated. A Valori battle had never lasted 4 hours. Most were over in under 10 minutes. The crew casualties were significant, Yelith continued. Based on the medical logs we recovered, approximately 40% of the crew was killed or seriously wounded during the engagement. Yet the ship continued to fight. The humans continued to operate their stations even as their comrades died around them. One of the researchers made a sound of distress. Among the Valori, such casualties would have been considered a catastrophic defeat. A ship that lost 40% of its crew would surrender immediately to prevent further loss of life. The humans had kept fighting. Were they victorious? Ketharan asked. Yelith checked her data. The logs are incomplete, but it appears so. The Perseverance destroyed or disabled 3 enemy vessels before being forced to withdraw. The crew evacuated to a support ship that arrived after the battle and were extracted safely. 3 enemy ships. Ketharan tried to imagine a battle where a single damaged vessel, with nearly half its crew dead or wounded, managed to destroy 3 opponents before escaping. It should have been impossible. Yet the evidence was right in front of him. I want to understand their internal systems, he said. How does the ship continue to function after taking such damage? Yelith switched to a new set of displays. The human approach to engineering is based on redundancy. Every critical system has multiple backups. There are 3 separate power generators, each capable of running the entire ship independently. There are 2 bridge locations, a primary and a secondary, connected by hardened communication lines. Life support has 4 independent units spread throughout the vessel, and the crew areas, divided into isolated sections, each with its own atmospheric controls and emergency supplies. If one section is breached, it can be sealed off without affecting the others. The crew in the remaining sections can continue to function. Ketharan thought about what this meant in practical terms. A Valori ship was efficient, with systems integrated and streamlined. But if any key component failed, the entire vessel was compromised. A human ship was wasteful, carrying multiple versions of every critical system, but it could lose section after section and still remain operational. They expect to take damage, he said slowly. Their entire design philosophy is built around the assumption that they will be hit, that systems will fail, that crew members will die, and they plan for it. They build their ships to survive it. It seems so, Yillith agreed. But High Analyst, this raises a troubling question. What kind of enemies do the humans face that require such extensive preparations? What kind of wars do they fight that made this level of protection necessary? Ketharon did not answer immediately. He was thinking about the history files they had recovered from the ship's database. Most were encrypted, but some basic historical information had been accessible. What he had read there disturbed him deeply. The humans had been fighting wars since before they had discovered fire. Their history was an endless chronicle of conflict, battle after battle stretching back to the dawn of their civilization. They had fought over territory, over resources, over religious beliefs, over political systems. They had developed weapons of increasingly terrible power, from simple clubs to nuclear bombs, and they had turned all of that experience, all of that knowledge of violence and destruction, toward the challenge of building ships that could survive in space. I believe, Ketharan said finally, that the enemies the humans prepared to fight were themselves. The room fell silent again. The researchers looked at each other with expressions of confusion and growing concern. Themselves? Yillith asked. Look at the design. Look at the weapons we have found. Look at the level of preparation for damage and casualties. This is not a ship built to fight primitive aliens or natural hazards. This is a ship built to fight an enemy, with equal technology, equal determination, equal willingness to take and inflict damage. Ketharan brought up the historical files on the main display. The humans spent thousands of years at war with each other. Nation against nation, ideology against ideology. They developed these technologies, these tactics, these designs, in conflicts against their own kind. The researchers stared at the scrolling text, the endless list of wars and battles and casualties. The numbers were staggering. Millions dead in single conflicts, entire cities destroyed, weapons capable of ending civilization itself. They built ships to survive fighting themselves, Ketharan continued. And now they have brought those ships to the stars. They have brought all of that knowledge, all of that experience, all of that capacity for violence and endurance into the wider galaxy. But surely they will be more peaceful now, one of the junior researchers said hopefully. Now that they face alien species, surely they will set aside their warlike nature. Ketharan looked at the young researcher with something close to pity. Would you like to see what weapons they have brought with them? Would you like to see what tools they have developed for making war? The researcher did not answer. I thought not. Ketharan turned back to the displays. Continue the analysis. I want complete specifications on every system, every weapon, every piece of technology we can find. The collective needs to understand exactly what we are dealing with. As his team returned to their work, Ketharan remained standing before the cross-section of human armor. 5 layers of protection, each one designed to absorb different types of damage. Hundreds of hits absorbed, 40% casualties sustained. And still the ship had kept fighting. He had spent his career believing that the Valori way of war was superior. Quick, clean, efficient. Minimal casualties on both sides. Wars ended through precision rather than attrition. Now he wondered if the Valori had simply been lucky. Lucky to have faced enemies who shared their philosophy. Lucky to have never encountered a species that saw war not as a problem to be solved, but as a natural state of existence. The humans were such a species. Everything about their technology, their design philosophy, their history pointed to the same conclusion. They were a people born in violence, raised in conflict, shaped by endless war, and they were building more ships. Ketharan thought about the reports he would need to send to the collective. He thought about how to explain what he had found here, at the edge of explored space. He thought about the reaction his findings would cause among the comfortable, peaceful leaders who had never faced a serious military threat. They would not want to believe him. They would dismiss his concerns as overreaction, his analysis as flawed. They would continue to view the humans as a primitive species, not worth serious attention. And that, Ketharan realized, might be the most dangerous mistake the collective had ever made. He turned away from the displays and walked toward the door. There was more work to do, more systems to analyze, more weapons to catalog. The humans had built their ship to survive the worst the galaxy could throw at it. Now Ketharan needed to understand just how much damage they could throw back. The weapons bay of the Perseverance was located deep in the belly of the ship, protected by additional layers of armor and blast doors thick enough to stop a small meteor. It had taken Ketharan's team nearly a day to gain access, working through security systems and locked barriers that seemed designed to prevent even the crew themselves from entering without proper authorization. When they finally stepped inside, Ketharan understood why. The chamber was enormous, stretching across 3 decks and taking up nearly a quarter of the ship's internal volume. Racks of missiles lined the walls, hundreds of them, each one resting in its own launch tube. Along the ceiling ran the magnetic rails of what appeared to be kinetic launchers, their barrels extending toward ports in the hull. And in the center of it all, behind the heaviest doors Ketharan had ever seen, was a storage facility marked with warning symbols in multiple languages. "By the ancient stars," Yeleth whispered. "This is not a warship. This is a weapons platform." Ketharan moved slowly through the chamber, his compound eyes taking in every detail. The Vailori used energy weapons almost exclusively. Clean, efficient, precise. A single well-aimed laser could disable an enemy vessel with minimal collateral damage. The idea of filling your ship with this many physical weapons seemed almost barbaric. "Begin your analysis," he ordered. "I want to understand exactly what each of these systems does." The team spread out, each researcher taking a different section of the weapons bay. Ketharan walked toward the kinetic launchers first, drawn by their sheer size. The rails ran for nearly 50 meters along the ship's length, their surfaces polished to a mirror finish. "Hi, Analyst," called one of the engineers. "I have completed preliminary scans of the magnetic accelerator system. The results are concerning." Ketharan joined him at a diagnostic terminal that had been connected to the human systems. The data on the screen made his heart skip a beat. "These rails accelerate solid metal projectiles to approximately 3% of light speed," the engineer explained. "The standard ammunition appears to be tungsten rods, each weighing roughly 50 kilograms. Ketharan ran the calculations in his head. A 50-kilogram object moving at 3% of light speed carried kinetic energy equivalent to a small nuclear weapon. And from the ammunition storage he could see, the ship carried hundreds of these projectiles. What is the rate of fire? 1 round every 4 seconds from each launcher. The ship has 6 launchers total. 6 launchers, firing every 4 seconds. That meant the Perseverance could unleash approximately 90 rounds per minute, each one carrying enough energy to crack a small moon. Ketharan felt a cold sensation spreading through his body. "The targeting systems are equally impressive," the engineer continued. "They use a combination of radar, LiDAR, and optical tracking to maintain accuracy at extreme ranges. Effective engagement distance appears to be approximately 3 light seconds. 3 light seconds. Nearly 1,000,000 kilometers. At that range, Vailori energy weapons had dispersed to the point of uselessness. But a solid object, once accelerated, would travel forever until it hit something. "Show me the missiles," Ketharan said. They moved to the racks along the walls. Up close, the missiles were larger than Ketharan had realized, each one nearly 3 meters long and half a meter in diameter. They came in several varieties, distinguished by colored bands painted on their casings. "We have identified 4 primary types," Yeleth reported, consulting her scanner. "The first type, marked with blue bands, are standard high-explosive warheads. They carry approximately 200 kilograms of chemical explosive and are designed for general use against enemy vessels." 200 kilograms of explosive, Ketharan repeated. "In a single missile?" "Yes. And the ship carries approximately 400 of this type." Yeleth moved to the next rack. "The second type, marked with yellow bands, are what the humans call cluster munitions. They are designed to split apart before impact, releasing dozens of smaller warheads that spread across a wide area." Ketharan examined one of the yellow-banded missiles. The design was ingenious in a horrible way. A single launch could saturate an entire region of space with explosive projectiles, overwhelming point defense systems and ensuring that at least some would reach their targets. "The third type is more specialized." Yeleth's voice had grown quieter. "These are marked with red bands and are called breacher missiles. They carry reinforced tips designed to penetrate armor, then detonate once inside the target vessel." Inside, Ketharan imagined a missile punching through the hull of a ship, driving deep into its interior before exploding. The damage would be catastrophic, destroying critical systems and killing crew members who thought they were protected behind layers of metal. And the fourth type? Yelith hesitated before answering. The fourth type is marked with black bands. According to the ship's manifest, they carry nuclear warheads. The team fell silent. Nuclear weapons were known to the Valori, of course. They had developed them millennia ago, during the last major war the Collective had fought, but they had been banned by universal agreement. Their destructive power deemed too terrible for civilized species to employ. The humans carried them as standard equipment on a patrol vessel. How many? Kitharan asked. 48 nuclear missiles. The warheads range from 50 kilotons to 2 megatons yield. Kitharan closed his eyes for a moment. A 2-megaton nuclear weapon, delivered by a missile that could penetrate armor and detonate inside an enemy ship. The thought was almost too horrible to contemplate. Is there more? He asked, though he was not sure he wanted to hear the answer. There is. Yelith led him toward the center of the weapons bay, toward the heavily secured storage facility he had noticed earlier. This area is marked with warning symbols in the human language. Our translator identifies them as indicating extreme danger, and the specific hazard as antimatter. Antimatter. The words seemed to echo in the silent chamber. Every species that developed advanced technology eventually discovered antimatter. It was the most potent energy source in the universe, releasing tremendous power when it came into contact with normal matter. Most civilizations used it carefully, in tiny amounts, for power generation or scientific research. The security locks on the storage facility were the most advanced on the ship. It took the team nearly 2 hours to bypass them. When the doors finally opened, Kitharan stepped inside and found himself in a small room dominated by a single massive container. This is a magnetic containment vessel, Yelith explained. It uses powerful electromagnetic fields to keep the antimatter suspended without touching the walls. The power supply is independent of the main ship systems, with multiple redundant backups. How much antimatter is stored here? Yelith consulted her scanner. Approximately 200 grams. 200 grams. It did not sound like much, but Kitharan knew better. 200 grams of antimatter, if released to contact normal matter, would produce an explosion equivalent to approximately 8 megatons of nuclear explosive. 8 million tons of destructive force, contained in a space barely larger than a human fist. What is its purpose? Kitharan asked. Is this the ship's power source? No. The ship uses a fusion reactor for power generation. Yelith pointed to a set of loading mechanisms attached to the container. This antimatter is designated for weapons use only. According to the documentation, it can be loaded into specialized warheads for deployment against heavily fortified targets. Weapons use. The humans had built antimatter bombs. They had done what no other species in known space had dared to do. They had taken the most destructive force in the universe and turned it into a weapon of war. The documentation includes targeting priorities for antimatter weapons. Yelith continued, her voice barely above a whisper. Planetary defense installations, space stations, enemy fleet concentrations, and... She paused, her antennae trembling. And what? And planetary surfaces. In cases of what the humans call strategic necessity, Kitharan felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath him. Planetary surfaces. The humans had built weapons capable of destroying entire worlds, and they had done so deliberately, with full knowledge of what they were creating. He thought about his homeworld, a beautiful planet of blue oceans and green forests where billions of Valori lived peaceful lives. He thought about how a single human ship, carrying just 200 grams of antimatter, could reduce that world to radioactive ash. And this was a patrol vessel, a small ship. How much antimatter did their larger vessels carry? I need to see the fire control systems, Kitharan said. I need to understand how these weapons are aimed and deployed. They left the antimatter storage and made their way to the weapons control center, a small room adjacent to the secondary bridge. Multiple stations lined the walls, each one dedicated to a different weapons system. The crew who had served here had been responsible for unleashing destruction on a scale that made Kitharan's mind reel. He accessed one of the terminals and began reviewing the targeting protocols. What he found there did nothing to ease his fears. The human weapon systems were designed for flexibility. They could engage targets at multiple ranges, using different weapons for different situations. The kinetic launchers were primary long-range weapons. capable of striking enemies before they could close to energy weapon range. The missiles provided mid-range capability, with different warhead types allowing for tactical adaptation. The nuclear weapons were reserved for heavily armored targets or fleet actions, and the antimatter was kept in reserve for targets that absolutely had to be destroyed. There were no limitations on use, no protocols requiring authorization from distant commanders or civilian leaders. The captain of the ship had full authority to deploy any weapon in the arsenal, including the antimatter bombs, based solely on their own judgment. They trust individual commanders with this power, Ketharan said. A single person can decide to use weapons that could destroy a planet. The human command structure appears to emphasize individual initiative, Yeleth replied. Their documentation stresses the importance of rapid decision-making in combat situations. They do not wait for permission. Ketharan thought about Violori military doctrine, the layers of command authority, the committees and councils that had to approve any major action. It took days sometimes to reach a decision about deployment of forces. The humans could destroy a world in seconds if they chose to. Show me the targeting data from their last battle, he ordered. Yeleth pulled up the relevant files. The display showed the engagement from the Perseverance's perspective, a reconstruction based on sensor logs and weapons data. 3 enemy ships, unknown design, had attacked the human vessel in an ambush. The battle had lasted over 4 hours, exactly as the previous reports had indicated. What struck Ketharan was the efficiency of the human response. Within seconds of the first attack, the weapon systems had come online and begun returning fire. The kinetic launchers had immediately targeted the largest enemy vessel, pounding it with slug after slug while the missiles launched against the smaller ships. The humans had not tried to flee. They had not attempted to negotiate. They had recognized a threat and responded with overwhelming violence, using every weapon at their disposal to destroy their attackers. The enemy ships had fought back, of course. The Perseverance had taken tremendous damage, as evidenced by the scars across its hull, but the humans had kept fighting, their weapons systems remaining operational even as entire sections of the ship burned around them. In the end, all 3 enemy vessels had been destroyed. The Perseverance had survived, barely, and had limped away to meet with reinforcements. And somewhere in the vast database of human military records, this engagement was probably classified as routine. They are predators, Ketharan said suddenly. Yeleth turned to look at him. High Analyst, I have been trying to understand the human approach to warfare, and I finally see it. They are predators. They do not fight to defend themselves or to achieve limited objectives. They fight to kill. He gestured at the weapons bay around them. Look at these systems. They are not designed to disable enemy vessels or force surrender. They are designed to destroy the kinetic rounds, the missiles, the nuclear weapons, the antimatter. Every weapon here is meant to kill the enemy as quickly and thoroughly as possible. Is that not the purpose of all weapons? No. Ketharan shook his head. Valori weapons are designed to end conflicts, not to maximize destruction. We target engines to prevent escape, weapons to prevent retaliation, communication systems to force negotiation. We use the minimum force necessary to achieve our objectives. He pointed at the nuclear missiles. The humans use the maximum force available. They do not want to disable their enemies. They want to destroy them completely, so thoroughly that they can never pose a threat again. It was a fundamentally different approach to conflict. The Vailori fought to resolve disputes. The humans fought to eliminate threats. And anyone who threatened a human ship became a target for every terrible weapon in their arsenal. What do we tell the collective? Yeleth asked quietly. Ketharan considered the question carefully. The collective's military was based on principles that had served them well for millennia. Speed, precision, minimal casualties. Their ships were fast and accurate. Their tactics refined through centuries of experience. But they had never faced an enemy like this. An enemy that could absorb tremendous punishment and keep fighting. An enemy that carried enough firepower to destroy entire fleets. An enemy that saw warfare not as a last resort but as a natural state of existence. We tell them the truth, Ketharan said finally. We tell them that the humans are the most dangerous species we have ever encountered. We tell them that every assumption we have made about warfare may be wrong. And we tell them that if we ever find ourselves in conflict with these creatures, we must win quickly and decisively. Because if we do not, he looked around at the missiles, the launchers, the armored chamber that held enough destructive power to sterilize a star system. If we do not, they will destroy us completely. They will not stop. They will not negotiate. They will not show mercy. They will fight until we are dead, or they are, because that is what they do. That is what they have always done. And they have gotten very, very good at it. The team gathered their equipment in silence. They had seen enough of the weapons bay. They had seen more than enough. Now Ketharan needed to understand the creatures who had built these terrible things. He needed to understand the minds that could create such instruments of destruction and then carry them across the stars. He had a feeling that what he learned would be even more frightening than what he had already discovered. The captain's quarters aboard the Perseverance were small and simple. A narrow bed was built into one wall. A desk occupied the opposite corner, covered with personal items and a computer terminal. A single photograph hung above the bed, showing a group of humans standing together on what appeared to be the bridge of the ship. Ketharan stood in the doorway, studying the room with the careful eyes of a scientist, examining an artifact from a lost civilization. He had spent the past 2 days analyzing weapons and armor. Now he needed to understand the creatures who had built them. The captain's name was Sarah Chen, Yelith reported, consulting the personnel files they had recovered. She was 43 years old by human reckoning, with 17 years of service in their military. She received multiple commendations for valor in combat before being assigned to command this vessel. Ketharan moved to the desk and picked up one of the personal items there. It was a small metal object, circular, with a ribbon attached. The surface was engraved with words and an image of a star. What is this? A medal, a symbol of recognition for exceptional performance in battle. Yelith checked her database. This particular medal is called the Silver Star. According to human records, it is awarded for gallantry in action against an enemy. Gallantry. Ketharan turned the medal over in his hands. The Vailori had no equivalent concept. Their military gave promotions for effective service and punishments for failure. The idea of special recognition for bravery in battle seemed strange to him. He set the medal down and accessed the computer terminal. The captain had kept a personal log, separate from the official ship's records. Much of it was encrypted, but some entries were accessible. The first entry he read was dated several months before the battle that had crippled the ship. Captain Chen wrote about the crew, describing the new officers who had recently joined and the veterans who had served with her for years. Her words were warm and personal, filled with obvious affection for the people under her command. She cared about them, Ketharan observed. This is not the writing of someone who sees her crew as expendable resources. The humans appear to form strong emotional bonds, Yelith agreed. Their social structure is based on personal relationships, rather than hierarchical obligation. Ketharan scrolled through more entries. He found records of training exercises, maintenance reports, and daily observations about life aboard the ship. Captain Chen wrote about meals shared with her officers, celebrations of crew members' birthdays, and quiet moments of contemplation during night watches. Then he reached the entries from the day of the battle. Contact with unknown vessels, Chen had written. 3 ships, unknown configuration. They appeared on our sensors without warning and opened fire immediately. No communication, no demands. They simply attacked. The entry continued with clinical precision, describing the early moments of the engagement. The Perseverance had returned fire while attempting to establish communication with the attackers. When communication failed, Chen had ordered all weapon systems to combat mode. "We are outgunned and outmaneuvered," she wrote. "The enemy has better speed and their weapons are cutting through our outer armor. But we are not helpless. We will make them pay for every hit they land on us." Ketharan felt a chill reading those words. There was no fear in them, no consideration of surrender or retreat, just a cold determination to fight and inflict as much damage as possible. The next several entries were brief, written during lulls in the fighting. Chen reported casualties, damage to critical systems, and the gradual destruction of the enemy ships. Her tone remained steady throughout, even as the death toll among her crew climbed higher. "Lieutenant Park died at his station," one entry read. "He refused to leave even when the fire reached his compartment. He kept firing until the smoke took him. I will recommend him for honors." Ensign Williams saved 3 crew members by sealing herself in a breached compartment. The explosive decompression killed her, but the others lived. She was 22 years old. Chief Engineer Morrison kept the engines running despite third-degree burns across his back. Medical wanted to sedate him. He told them he would rest when the battle was over. Story after story of humans enduring terrible injuries and continuing to fight. Ketharan read about crew members who ignored broken bones to man their stations, who bandaged their own wounds rather than leave for medical treatment, who gave their lives to protect their comrades without hesitation. "This is not normal behavior," he said. "No species should be able to function under this level of trauma." "I have found the medical records," Yelith replied. "They are enlightening." She transferred the data to Ketharan's terminal. What he saw there defied his understanding of biology. The human body was incredibly resilient. They could survive injuries that would kill a Valori instantly. They could function with damaged organs, broken bones, and severe blood loss. Their brains produced chemicals that suppressed pain and enhanced focus during times of extreme stress. "They are built for this," Ketharan realized. "Their bodies evolved to survive combat." It appears so. The humans developed on a world with many predators and faced constant competition for resources. Those who could survive injury and continue fighting lived to reproduce. Those who could not did not. Natural selection. The universe itself had shaped the humans into warriors, culling the weak over millions of years until only the survivors remained. Every human alive was the descendant of countless generations of fighters, each one tough enough to pass on their genes. Ketharan turned to the historical database that had been recovered from the ship's systems. He needed to understand how the humans had become what they were. The answer, he suspected, lay in their past. The database contained thousands of years of human history, and it was exactly as terrible as he had feared. War. Endless war. Stretching back to the dawn of their civilization. The humans had fought over everything: territory, food, water, precious metals, religious beliefs, political ideologies. They had invented increasingly terrible weapons, each generation building on the destruction of the one before. Ketharan read about conflicts with names like World War, a conflict that had spanned their entire planet and killed tens of millions. He learned about nuclear weapons, first developed to end one war, and then built in massive quantities for wars that never came. Then he found the concept that froze his blood in his veins. Mad. He read aloud. Mutually assured destruction. The documentation explained the term in dry, technical language. During a period of human history, two powerful nations had built enough nuclear weapons to destroy each other completely, not just their armies, but their entire civilizations. Every city, every farm, every living thing, and this threat of total annihilation had been considered a form of peace. They threatened to destroy themselves, Ketharan said slowly. Both sides knew that any war would mean extinction, and they lived with this threat for decades, building more and more weapons, ready to end their own species rather than accept defeat. Yelith's antennae were pressed flat against her skull. "This is madness." "No." Ketharan shook his head. "This is logic taken to its extreme. If both sides possess the ability to destroy each other completely, neither side can afford to attack. The threat of mutual extinction ensures cooperation. But the risk, the humans accepted the risk. They lived with the knowledge that their civilization could end in fire at any moment, and they continued to build their weapons anyway, because they would rather risk extinction than accept domination. He thought about what this meant for any species that might find itself in conflict with humanity. The humans had already proven they would rather die than surrender. They had proven it against each other, over and over again throughout their history. The database contained more horrors: chemical weapons that dissolved human flesh, biological weapons that turned the body against itself, psychological warfare designed to break the mind. The humans had explored every possible avenue of destruction, tested every method of killing their fellow beings, and they had survived it all. "Show me the population figures," Ketharan ordered. Yelith pulled up the data. Despite the wars, despite the famines, despite the plagues and disasters, the human population had grown consistently over time. At the last recorded count, there were approximately 12 billion humans spread across their home planet and numerous colonies. 12 billion survivors. 12 billion descendants of the toughest, most resilient, most determined fighters their world had produced. And that number was growing. "They reproduce quickly," Yelith noted. Each generation is larger than the last. Their colonies are expanding faster than any species in our records. Ketharan closed the database and sat back in the captain's chair. He was beginning to understand the full scope of what the collective faced. The humans were not just dangerous because of their weapons or their armor. They were dangerous because of what they were, a species forged in the fires of constant conflict, shaped by evolution and history into the ultimate survivors. They did not know how to give up. They did not know how to accept defeat. They only knew how to fight and endure until their enemies were destroyed. He picked up the captain's log again and read the final entries. Enemy vessels destroyed, Chen had written. Total crew casualties, 43%. The ship is badly damaged, but we have won. Rescue vessels are en route. We will live to fight another day. She had lost nearly half her crew, and she considered it a victory. The Perseverance had been reduced to a burning wreck, and she was already thinking about the next battle. The last entry was personal, written while waiting for the rescue ships to arrive. I think about the crew members we lost today. Good people, all of them. They deserved better than to die in the darkness between stars, fighting an enemy we do not even understand. But they did not hesitate. When the attack came, they went to their stations and did their duty. They fought and died so that others could live. That is what we do. That is what humans have always done. We are not the strongest species in the universe. We are not the smartest or the most advanced. But we are the ones who never give up. We are the ones who keep fighting when all hope is lost. We are the ones who would rather die free than live as slaves. If anyone ever reads this, know that the crew of the Perseverance died with honor. They faced their enemy without fear, and they made those bastards pay for every one of us they killed. That is our way. It has always been our way, and it always will be. Ketharan set down the log and sat in silence for a long moment. He had wanted to understand the humans, and now he did. He understood them better than he had ever wanted to. They were not monsters. They were not mindless killers. They were simply a species that had been forged in fire so hot that it had burned away everything except the ability to survive. They loved their families. They cared for their friends. They created art and music and literature. But when threatened, all of that fell away. And what remained was a creature that would fight to the death against any enemy. High Analyst, Yelith said quietly. What do we tell the collective? Ketharan thought about the comfortable, peaceful civilization he had left behind. The Valori who had never faced a real threat, who believed that reasonable discussion could solve any problem, who assumed that all species ultimately wanted the same things. We tell them to be afraid, he said finally. We tell them to be very, very afraid. And we tell them that whatever happens, we must never give the humans a reason to see us as enemies. Because if we do, they will not stop until one of us is destroyed. And looking at their history, looking at their weapons, looking at what they are willing to endure, he glanced at the photograph above the bed, at the smiling faces of the crew who had served and died aboard this ship. I am not confident that we would be the ones left standing. He stood and walked toward the door. There was one more analysis to complete, one more report to prepare. Then he would send his findings to the collective and hope that the leaders there would understand the warning he was trying to give them. The humans were coming. They were spreading across the galaxy, building their brutal ships and their terrible weapons. And the only way to survive their arrival was to make sure they never had a reason to use those weapons against you. Because once they started fighting, they would never stop. The captain's log had made that very clear. The humans would rather die free than live as slaves. And they had the weapons to take their enemies with them. The Grand Council Chamber of the Valori Collective was a magnificent space, built 10,000 years ago at the height of their civilization's power. Crystal walls rose toward a domed ceiling that displayed the stars in perfect detail. Representatives from 100-member species sat in tiered rows, their bodies and forms as varied as the worlds they called home. High Analyst Ketharan stood at the speaker's platform in the center of the chamber, feeling very small beneath the weight of so many watching eyes. He had spent 3 weeks traveling from the edge of explored space to reach this place. 3 weeks of preparing his report, organizing his evidence, rehearsing his words. Now the moment had come. Distinguished representatives, he began, his voice amplified to fill the enormous room. I come before you with information that I believe represents the most significant discovery in the history of the collective. Information about a species that has recently entered our region of space, a species called humans. There was a rustle of movement among the assembled delegates. Most of them had heard of humans. They were a topic of mild curiosity, a primitive species that had stumbled into faster-than-light travel and was now exploring the galaxy with the enthusiasm of children discovering a new playground. I have spent the past month analyzing a human vessel that was recovered at the edge of explored space, Ketharan continued. A ship called the Perseverance, classified by the humans as a light cruiser. A small vessel, by their standards. He activated the holographic display, and the image of the human ship appeared above the council chamber. Several delegates made sounds of surprise or amusement at its crude, angular design. Before I share my findings, I must ask the council to set aside their assumptions about this species. What I am about to show you will challenge everything we believe about warfare, survival, and the nature of intelligent life in the universe. The display changed to show the cross-section of the ship's hull. Ketharan began to explain the layered armor system, describing each level of protection and its purpose. As he spoke, the sounds of amusement faded and were replaced by growing silence. This ship was designed to absorb damage that would destroy any vessel in the collective fleet, Ketharan said. It was built to be hit hundreds of times and continue fighting. The humans do not rely on shields or evasion. They simply endure. He moved on to the weapon systems. The kinetic launchers, capable of striking targets at distances that made energy weapons useless. The missiles, carrying payloads of conventional explosives, nuclear warheads, and antimatter. The sheer volume of destructive power carried by a single small ship. The Perseverance had the capability to destroy a battle group of our best ships, Ketharan stated flatly. And according to our intelligence, the humans have hundreds of vessels like this one. Perhaps thousands. The chamber had grown very quiet. The delegates who had been amused by the primitive design were no longer laughing. They were staring at the holographic display with expressions of growing concern. But the weapons and armor are not what make the humans truly dangerous, Ketharan continued. What makes them dangerous is what they are, their nature, their history, their absolute refusal to surrender. He changed the display again, this time showing the historical data from the ship's database. Wars stretching back thousands of years, death tolls that made the delegates gasp, weapons of destruction that had been created, used, and improved upon generation after generation. The humans have been at war with themselves since before they developed writing, Ketharan explained. They have fought over territory, resources, beliefs, and ideas. They have killed hundreds of millions of their own kind. And through all of it, they have survived. They have grown stronger. He showed them the concept of mutually assured destruction, the nuclear standoff that had defined an entire era of human history, the willingness to risk total extinction rather than accept defeat. They built weapons capable of destroying their own civilization, Ketharan said. Not to use against aliens, not to fight off external threats, to use against each other. And they held those weapons ready for decades, prepared to end their species rather than let their enemies win. The silence in the chamber was absolute now. Even the delegates who had seemed most skeptical were watching with growing horror. Consider what this means, Ketharan continued. For thousands of years, the humans have been at war with an enemy, as intelligent, as adaptable, and as determined as themselves. Every weapon they build, every tactic they develop, every ship they design is tested against the most dangerous opponent they could possibly face, their own kind. He paused to let this sink in. We have always believed that our way of warfare is superior. Quick, clean, efficient, minimal casualties, rapid resolution. We have looked down on species that fought brutal wars of attrition, considering them primitive and wasteful. But I have come to realize that we were not superior. We were simply lucky. Lucky to have faced enemies who shared our philosophy. Lucky to have never encountered a species that views war the way humans do. He changed the display one final time, showing the crew logs from the Perseverance. The stories of humans fighting through injuries that would have killed any Valori. The final entry from Captain Chen, declaring her determination to fight until the end. They never give up, Ketharan said. They never surrender. They would rather die than accept defeat. And they have the weapons, the determination, and the sheer physical resilience to fight until the very end. He stepped back from the podium and faced the assembled delegates directly. My recommendation to this council is simple. Do not provoke the humans. Do not threaten them. Do not give them any reason to see the collective as an enemy. Because if they do, he thought about the antimatter storage, the nuclear missiles, the kinetic launchers that could crack moons. If they do, they will not stop until one of us is destroyed. And based on everything I have seen, I am not confident that we would be the ones left standing. The chamber erupted into noise. Delegates were shouting questions, demanding more information, expressing disbelief or fear. The moderator struggled to restore order, her calls for silence lost in the chaos. Finally, the senior delegate from the Thalari Union rose to his feet. The Thalari were an ancient species, nearly as old as the Velori themselves. Their representative was a towering figure with scales the color of burnished copper, and when he spoke, the chamber gradually fell silent. High Analyst Ketharan, he said in a deep, rumbling voice, you paint a frightening picture of this human species. But I must ask you this. Are they truly so different from other aggressive species we have encountered? Are they truly so much more dangerous than the Krithkai, or the Zolvan, or any of the other martial races we have dealt with in the past? Ketharan considered the question carefully before answering. Distinguished delegate, the species you mention are indeed aggressive. They value combat and martial prowess, but they fight for specific goals. Territory, resources, honor. When those goals are achieved or become impossible, they negotiate. They make peace. The humans are different. They do not fight for specific goals. They fight because it is their nature. They fight because they have been fighting for so long that they no longer know how to stop. And when they face an enemy, they do not seek victory. They seek destruction. Complete, total destruction of their opponent. Look at their weapons, he continued. Look at the antimatter bombs, the nuclear missiles, the kinetic rounds that could shatter planets. These are not weapons of conquest. These are weapons of extermination, built by a species that would rather destroy everything than accept defeat. The Tholari delegate was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly and sat back down. Other questions followed. How many human ships existed? Where were their colonies located? What were their political structures? Ketharan answered as best he could, drawing on the data recovered from the Perseverance. The humans had dozens of colony worlds spread across several star systems. Their population was growing rapidly, doubling every few generations. They had multiple governments, sometimes cooperating and sometimes competing, but all of them maintaining powerful military forces. They are expanding quickly, Ketharan reported. At their current rate of growth, they will reach collective space within the next 50 years, possibly sooner if they develop improved faster than light technology. Then we must act now, declared the delegate from the Myran Confederation, a small insectoid creature with brilliant blue wings. We must contain them before they become too powerful. A preemptive strike, while they are still weak. The suggestion sent a wave of murmurs through the chamber. Several delegates seemed to be considering the idea. Ketharan felt a cold chill run through his body. Distinguished delegate, he said carefully, I must strongly advise against any military action. A preemptive strike would give the humans exactly what they need. A common enemy, something to unite their various factions, something to fight. They would not win against the combined forces of the collective, the Myran delegate insisted. Our fleet is far larger than theirs. For now, Ketharan agreed. But consider what would happen if we attacked them. We would kill some of them, yes, perhaps many of them, but we would not kill them all. Some would survive. And those survivors would dedicate every resource, every ship, every weapon to destroying us in return. He thought about Captain Chen's final log entry. The crew of the Perseverance died with honor. They faced their enemy without fear, and they made those bastards pay for every one of us they killed. They would come for us, he continued. They would build more ships, more weapons, more armies. They would fight us for years, for decades, for generations if necessary. They would accept any casualties, make any sacrifice, to ensure our destruction. Because that is what they do. That is what they have always done. We might win such a war, but we would pay a terrible price. And even if we won, even if we destroyed every human ship and burned every human world, some of them would survive. Somewhere, hidden in the darkness between stars, humans would remain, and they would never forgive us. They would never stop hunting us. The chamber fell silent again. The delegates were beginning to understand what Ketharan had understood weeks ago, standing in the weapons bay of the Perseverance. "So what do you propose?" the Tholari delegate asked finally. "If we cannot fight them and cannot contain them, what can we do?" Ketharan took a deep breath. "We make peace with them. We establish contact, openly and honestly. We trade with them, cooperate with them, welcome them into the galactic community. We make ourselves their allies, because if we cannot be their enemies, we must be their friends. And perhaps, over time, we can teach them that there are other ways to solve problems than violence. Perhaps we can show them that the galaxy does not have to be a battlefield." "And if that fails?" the Myron delegate demanded. "Then we pray," Ketharan replied quietly. "We pray that when the humans finally turn their weapons against us, we can hold out long enough to negotiate a surrender, because fighting them to the end is not an option. They are better at it than we are. They always have been." The council debated for hours. Some delegates argued for immediate military preparation. Others called for isolation, for hiding from the humans and hoping they would go elsewhere. But in the end, the majority sided with Ketharan's recommendation. The resolution passed just before dawn the next day. The Valori Collective would seek peaceful contact with the human species. Diplomatic missions would be prepared. Trade agreements would be drafted. Every effort would be made to welcome the humans as partners rather than treat them as threats. As the delegates filed out of the chamber, exhausted and worried, Ketharan remained at the speaker's platform. He watched them go, wondering if any of them truly understood what was coming. The humans were different. They were something the galaxy had never seen before. A species forged in fire, hardened by millennia of warfare, carrying weapons that could destroy worlds. They were coming, spreading across the stars like a tide that could not be stopped. And all the peaceful, civilized species of the collective could do was hope that the tide would wash past them rather than over them. Ketharan thought about the photograph in Captain Chen's quarters. The smiling faces, the easy camaraderie. The humans were not monsters. They were people, with families and friends and dreams. They laughed and loved, and created beautiful things. But they were also killers. The most efficient killers the universe had ever produced. And if the collective ever forgot that, even for a moment, the consequences would be catastrophic. He gathered his notes and left the council chamber. Outside, the sun was rising over the capital city, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. It was beautiful, peaceful, serene. Somewhere out there, among the distant stars, the humans were building more ships, training more soldiers, developing more weapons. They had no idea that the galaxy had just learned to fear them. They were simply doing what they had always done, what their nature demanded, preparing for war, because that was what humans did. That was what they had always done, and that was what they would always do, until the end of time itself. Ketharan walked into the morning light and allowed himself a single moment of hope. Perhaps peace was possible. Perhaps the humans could change. Perhaps the galaxy could find a way to live with this dangerous new species. But deep in his heart, he knew the truth. The humans would never change. They could not change. They were what their history and their evolution had made them, and the galaxy would simply have to learn to live with that. Already trying, the stars continued to burn overhead, indifferent to the small creatures moving beneath them. And somewhere, on a small blue world called Earth, a child was being born. A new human, inheriting the legacy of countless generations of survivors. Another warrior for a species that had never known anything else. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The humans were coming, and the galaxy would never be the same again.